Have you ever wondered why the fuel you are pumping into your car today might actually be acting totally differently inside your engine than it did just a few years ago? Well, today we are looking at a fascinating and honestly, a highly debated shift that's happening right now at gas stations all across India. It's basically a classic tale of massive environmental blueprints crashing headfirst into the microscopic realities of everyday mechanics. We're going to explore the promise versus the reality of this brand new fuel blend.
All right, let's jump right in and set up a quick baseline. What exactly is this new fuel? It's called E20. Basically, it's a biofuel blend made up of 80% traditional petrol mixed with 20% ethanol. Now, ethanol is an oxygenate, and for this specific biofuel, it's derived mostly from agricultural crops, with sugarcane being the absolute standout here. So, whether you realize it or not, 20% of what's going into your tank right now is actually coming from a farm, not an oil rig. Pretty crazy, right?
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are breaking down India's sudden mandatory rollout of E20 petrol. We're going to uncover exactly what the government is trying to achieve here and look at why so many daily commuters are suddenly checking their engine lights and, well, their wallets. Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with what E20 fuel actually is, move on to the massive green economic promises, and then pivot to some hidden realities, like engine chemistry, the mileage and cost penalty, and warranties and insurance confusion. Finally, we'll wrap up by looking at the timelines and political interests. Let's get started.
Section 1. What is E20 fuel? The science of blending.
The origin story of this fuel is actually super fascinating. Ethanol is, believe it or not, essentially the exact same alcohol that people drink. It's created by fermenting starchy or sugary foods like corn, rice, and particularly sugarcane. Sugarcane is the real star player here, just because it yields the highest volume of sugar per acre. When you mix it with petrol, ethanol acts as an oxygenator. That basically means it helps the petrol burn a lot more efficiently in your engine. But because it's chemically identical to consumable alcohol, it literally has to be blended with poisons, like methanol, just to make sure your car is the only thing drinking it.
Section 2. The green economic promise. Macro-level benefits.
Now, the macro-level benefits here are absolutely staggering. According to an analysis by Niti Aayog, E20 causes 30% fewer carbon emissions compared to the older E10 blend. On top of that, ethanol made specifically from sugarcane produces a massive 65% less greenhouse gas emissions than pure traditional petrol. So on a national scale, these reductions in air pollution are undeniable, and they are incredibly positive for our overall climate goals.
But it's not just green for the environment, right? It's green for the economy too. By blending 20% of homegrown ethanol into our petrol, India actually reduced its dependency on imported crude oil by 19.3 million tons. To put that into perspective, that saved the public exchequer a mind-blowing 1.36 trillion rupees. Plus, since ethanol comes from crops, agricultural producers are directly benefiting. The government states that farmers have earned 1.18 trillion rupees from this initiative since 2014. So, those are the macro promises, and they are definitely powerful.
Section 3. Engine chemistry and corrosion. The micro-reality.
But here's the catch. The crucial thing to understand is that ethanol has this specific chemical quirk. It naturally attracts water molecules. So if you're not out driving your car every single day, that moisture actually starts to separate and pool right at the bottom of your fuel tank. And this is exactly where the quiet damage begins. That pooled water causes corrosion and rust inside vehicles that simply weren't specifically designed to handle it. Eventually, that rust flakes off, mixes in with the fuel, and starts blocking up the fuel lines. Meanwhile, that water and ethanol mixture is actively degrading the engine's rubber pipes and filters. It's really a slow, quiet mechanical degradation.
Section 4. The mileage and cost penalty. Consumer impact.
Moving on. It's really just pure physics that ethanol produces about 30% less energy than petrol does. So naturally, when you blend more ethanol in, your engine is getting less energy per liter. Now, government bodies like Niti Aayog originally claimed the mileage drop would only be around 1 to 2%, but consumer reality tells a very different story. In a huge local circles survey of 36,000 vehicle owners, a whopping 44% reported that their mileage dropped by more than 10%. And since the petrol price at the pump hasn't dropped to reflect that lower energy output, our source estimates some consumers are actually facing up to a 40% increase in their overall monthly fuel expenses. Ouch.
Section 5. Warranties and insurance confusion. Navigating the fine print.
And if you're thinking about upgrading an older E10 compliant car to handle E20, well, it isn't cheap. It can run you anywhere from 6,000 rupees for a basic kit all the way up to 35,000 rupees if you have to replace the fuel pumps and tanks. But the real headache here lies with the manufacturers. Car manuals from companies like Hyundai explicitly state that using fuel with more than 10% ethanol could actually void the warranty. Brands like Toyota and Renault initially warned against it too, but then kind of flip-flopped, later citing government safety tests to reassure everyone. To add to the anxiety, news reports are suggesting standard motor insurance might not even cover engine damage if they classify E20 in an older car as using the wrong fuel. In fact, an insurer like ACO previously tweeted that exact stance out to the world, right before quickly deleting it.
Section 6. Timelines and Political Interests. Analyzing the rollout.
To defend this rapid rollout, the government often points to Brazil, which successfully uses really high ethanol blends. But here's the thing. Brazil started their slow transition way back in the 1970s. They literally gave their population 50 years to adapt. Now compare that to India's recent timeline. E10 fuel was only really introduced in 2022. Just 1 year later, in 2023, car companies finally began manufacturing E20-compliant vehicles. Yet, by 2025, the government mandated E20 nationwide. We effectively compressed a 50-year infrastructure transition into roughly 3 years, forcing this fuel into millions of cars that simply were never built for it.
The source material we're looking at today makes a pretty strong, structured critique of this whole hyper-accelerated timeline. Their main argument is that the rollout completely bypassed 3 logical steps. First off, they argue the government really should have stuck to their original 2030 schedule, which would have given people enough time to actually buy compliant cars. Second, since the government saved that massive 1.36 trillion rupees, the source argues those savings should have been passed down to the consumer to offset that lower mileage we talked about earlier. And third, they believe pure petrol should have remained an option at the pump rather than forcing this mandatory nationwide switch practically overnight.
Furthermore, our source material brings up some pretty striking allegations regarding the political motivations behind this rushed timeline. The source points out potential conflicts of interest, noting that Union Transport Minister Nitin Gadkari, who has heavily lobbied for higher ethanol blending limits since 2014, actually has deep family ties to the ethanol industry. According to the source, the Party Group, founded by the minister himself, was among the very first ethanol plants in India, and his sons now run companies like Manis Agro and Cyan Agro, which produce and supply massive quantities of ethanol. The source highlights these specific connections to suggest that these familial business interests might have benefited from the government's aggressive new policies. And to back up those claims, the source provides some specific financial data. Cyan Agro Industries, which is a publicly listed company run by the minister's son, saw a staggering yearly revenue growth of 37.55% over the last 5 years. For context, the industry average is just about 7%. Even more striking, their yearly net income shot up by 62.43%, completely dwarfing the industry average of 14%. The source uses these numbers to illustrate how companies tied to political figures aggressively outpace the market right during the exact period of this accelerated ethanol mandate.
So that brings us to our final thought. We've seen the undeniable macroeconomic and environmental benefits, but we've also looked at the stark micro-realities of rusting engines, plummeting mileage, voided warranties, and highly scrutinized political timelines. It leaves us with one incredibly provocative question to consider. Is the rapid transition to E20 petrol a much-needed green revolution for the nation, or is it a rushed experiment paid for straight out of the pockets of everyday consumers? It's definitely a complex issue, and understanding both the policy and the science gives you the power to see the full picture. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.